Okay, we're going live. We are live.
Yeah, no. Hello, I warmly welcome you to our 27th webinar by the Academy of Space Renaissance International. Okay. My name is Sabine Heinz. Moment, I have to put it here. So, my name is Sabine Heinz and I'm the host of our webinar series. And on the 17th of October, 2022, I'm delighted that you have come to join us. We have people watching from New York, from Great Britain, and from Norway, from Italy, from Germany. And I'm happy to announce today our special guest. It's Alberto Cavallo from Italy, one of the founders and member of the board of SRI. Hello, Alberto.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Alberto will speak today about astropolitics, and I think it is a very interesting topic. And I also would like to welcome Adriano Ottino. He's one of our vice presidents and former president and founder of the SRI.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
And Alberto, before I leave you the stage, I would like to introduce you to our audience.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alberto Cavallo is an electrical engineer, graduated at the Politecnico di Torino in 1985. He began his activity with designing electric systems in Fiat Engineering, the engineering and construction company of the Fiat Group, moving soon to control and automation systems in the same company. He was involved in all business areas of the company, which included revamping and new projects of car factories for the Fiat Group, as well as large infrastructures, power and co-generation plants for external clients. Since Fiat Engineering was transferred from Fiat Group to a new EPC group and then merged with a large EPC company in Milan, he has been involved in large oil and gas and petrochemical projects all over the world. Besides his professional activities, he has always taken part in several cultural activities. Alberto Cavallo was a member of the associations of alumni of the Liceo Classico Vittorio Alfieri of Turin, active in promoting humanistic culture as well as its connection to the technical and scientific area. He managed his own website, 3W Eurinome Italy, about philosophy, science, and politics and geopolitics. Because of this, he got in contact with Adriano Ottino and his Technologies of the Frontiers, TDF, then becoming one of the founding members of Space Renaissance International, as I mentioned. And besides several papers in his professional area, he has written several articles for his own site for TDF and SRI, also Space Renaissance International, co-authoring the book 3 Theses for the Space Renaissance with Adriano Ottino and Patrick Collins. Alberto, we are curious to learn what you will tell us today about astropolitics, and the stage is yours. You may share your screen.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Thank you, all the audience we have today. Thank you for coming. And then let's start with astropolitics. I'll share my presentation now. Okay. I hope that you can see the first page of my presentation.
Yes, moment.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
So, first of all, Space Renaissance supports peaceful civilian expansion into outer space. But just read the instructions. This is the joke. Better the manifesto and the Congress resolutions. But there is another point of view about space and expansion into it, not just as peaceful as here we are talking about that. So essentially, space has become a part of the international politics. What is geopolitics, first of all? Geopolitics is a study of international relations in consideration of geography. That is the study of the relations among states and state-like organization and how they are influenced by geography. That means both human and physical geography, meaning the territories, their characteristics, the climate, the natural resources, but also man-made things like population, like culture, of course, the power of nations and their economy. And everything that falls into the field of geography as it influences the international relations. And there is no doubt that international relations are mostly about national interest and power, meaning the domination, meaning that there is always a clash of nations.
Alberto, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are seeing a black rectangle on the right of the
okay.
The video. I don't know if you see it.
I think you can. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah. It's fine now. Okay.
Oh, okay. It's
Okay.
it's an effect. It's a malfunction of Zoom, but I found. Okay. Nowadays, what happened? Geopolitical analysts recognize that outer space has established its role among geopolitical factors and is now decisive. And then we will see how it's working in the current events and even current wars. And why astropolitics? Of course, geopolitics comes from the geo prefix means Earth. If we go into space, it becomes astropolitics. This word is not invented by me. This word exists at least since 2002, when Everett Dolman wrote a book entitled Astropolitics, with K, the German form, and in 2002, and he used this term to indicate exactly what I'm talking about now. And of course, as Space Renaissance, we introduced the concept of space, not war. We tried to do many things about that. And this concept is very dear to us. But unfortunately, it seems that the reverse is happening. Last year, the Italian geopolitical journal Limes, which is Limes is the Latin word for border. And the last number of 2021 was entitled Spaces for Making War. Because our concept of space, not war, was the idea that space can give the opportunity to expand without conflict and to develop advanced industry, not for making weapons, but for making other things like space vehicles and structures. Because, you know, military industry is very important in today's world. And the aerospace industry could be redirected to peaceful use, but unfortunately, it's not happening too much. Because nations are much more competitive than cooperative. In the current situation, we all know, unfortunately, it's getting worse. Cooperation in space is still there, but is being reduced, is waning. It's still there because, you know, the Russians and the Americans are still together in the ISS, but many other initiatives have been stopped, like, for instance, the European Mars rover that was to be sent into space by the Russians, then everything has been stopped. And there is not only the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but this is a very good example, unfortunately, of what is happening now. And even in space, therefore, there are points of attrition and competition between nations. So nations are bringing their conflicts to space too. And then we are giving some hints about what's happening in Ukraine. First of all, we are talking about geopolitics and astropolitics. So we are not talking about moral issues. So this is analysis. It's very important to say because we are all invested by this, of course, by propaganda. War propaganda on both sides is arriving to us. We don't want to say now who is right, who is wrong. This is about what's happening. And because geopolitics and astropolitics is about what's happening, not about who is right and who is wrong. If we go to the current war, a lot is happening in space too. Even if maybe the mainstream media are not saying very much about this. But for instance, fires cannot be hidden. So it's possible to understand where fires and bombardments are going on from a site dedicated to tracking fires. I will show this. This is a NASA website. It's the Fire Information for Resource Management System. This is intended to manage forests and forest fires and other things relevant to the environment or agriculture, to the management of forests. But what you see here is Ukraine. And the fires you are seeing here are the fires of the war. This image is centered on Zaporizhia. You know, this place is very famous, the place of the nuclear plant. In fact, the nuclear plant is not the same place as the city, but because the city is still in Ukrainian hands, while the nuclear power plant is controlled by the Russians. And then, so we can see that with the free available website, we can see what's happening, thanks to NASA satellites. So you can imagine what is possible to military satellites. We all know that Starlink has become the main communication infrastructure of Ukraine because the ground-based infrastructures of communication have been severely damaged. So essentially, both military and civilian communication of Ukraine is now based on space. Elon Musk's Starlink. By the way, Elon Musk is now discussing about the fact that he wants to be paid about that. But for now, it's still going on for free, and but he's not so happy about that. Positioning systems are widely used to guide airplanes and ground vehicles, but also weapons. The United States supplied the Ukrainians with the HIMARS artillery rocket system. You can see it here. This is an artillery system very important for the Ukrainians because this system allowed the Ukrainians to stop the Russians and then start a counterattack. These rockets are this launcher launches rockets that can have a range between 100 and 300 kilometers, and they are guided by the GPS. There is an intelligence center in Germany, in Ramstein, where the Americans have a center for intelligence that collects data from the satellites, and they send the GPS coordinates of Russian targets to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians can target these rockets to the Russian targets by just entering the GPS coordinates, because these rockets are guided by the satellites. So I think we can go to the next one. Okay, so space access are now decisive for wars. They are used to guide weapons. They are used to guide vehicles, of course. And of course, there are also countermeasures as it happens in war. Denial of use of one's own systems and jamming of the opponents are used now currently. And it's why all major powers have their own positioning systems. You know, everybody has a GPS. GPS is an American military system that is allowed to be used for civilian use. Everybody uses it for the navigators, and all smartphones are connected. Every device that includes positioning uses either GPS or other systems. The Russians have their own, the GLONASS, and they have launched another GLONASS satellite just yesterday or the day before. China has its own. Again, they don't want to rely on the American system, of course, they cannot. I have 3 devices here on my desk, 2 smartphones connected to the GPS, and 1 tablet that is connected both to GPS and also to GLONASS. It is a Chinese tablet. It's also connected to GLONASS, to the Russian one. Of course, in a higher level of war, space assets will become targets. And we have anti-satellite weapons. They have been tested by the USA, China, Russia, and also India. They can be launched by from the ground or from airplanes. For instance, the Americans have an anti-satellite wave rocket that can be launched by fighter planes. An F-15 can launch a rocket against a satellite. Some may be stationing in orbit. It's believed that at least Russia has some, because it's been found that some Russian satellites are following and approaching the satellites of other nations. They have not done anything hostile, but they could. And in space, you don't need to do a big explosion. In fact, explosions are not so practical in space. The best thing is that you can just send your asset to collide and to have a big collision, big crash, and then everything is destroyed. And China has made it clear that it will target American assets in space in case of a direct conflict to prevent the use in support of military activities, because they are essential, we have seen. They are absolutely essential. And if we go back now in history to the time of the first flight into space, it was done by Germany in October 1942. That means almost exactly 80 years ago. It was a General Walter Dornberger who gave clearance for the start, and the rocket was an A4 designed by Werner von Braun, of course. The A4 was an experimental rocket and was launched vertically, and it reached the space, meaning they reached the Kármán line. That means the location, the height where aerodynamical controls are not effective anymore. So it is space. Unfortunately, of course, the A4 was transformed into the V2 rocket weapon. It was something not so much different from what we have now. The only big difference between a V2 and the HIMARS is that the V2 had, of course, a very much older guidance systems, and it was less precise in hitting the target. But in those times, it was impossible to stop it. Nowadays, there are anti-missile systems and so on. Von Braun said that after the war that they were working for space exploration, they accepted military use because it was the only way to proceed with their studies. It's a fact that he was detained for some time because the Nazis accused him that he was not so keen on the military use of his rockets. Anyway, I believe that he really wanted just to go to space, and he did after. And he was just using the opportunity of. Unfortunately, there was the Second World War going on, and it was the only means to go on. But this is how space travel was originated. And then in the 50s, what happened? The main point is that a rocket capable to launch a payload into orbit is capable of launching a warhead on another continent, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Because if you can launch a satellite, you can launch anything in every part of the world. That means nuclear bombs. And it was apparent that bombers were becoming less and less credible as weapon delivery devices because anti-aircraft defenses were advancing. It was understood in the Korean War, for instance, that the B-29 and the B-50, the American bombers of the last phase of World War II, and by the way, B-29 was the bomber that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it was easy for a MiG-15 to shoot down a B-29. So on the other side, the Soviet Union had no bases near the USA, because while the USA could send the bombers from Europe, the Soviet Union could not send a bomber directly to American territory, only to Europe, but not to America. So it was very important for them to have long-range rockets. By the way, their nuclear bombs were a little bigger and more heavier than the American ones. So they have the very good rockets. Of course, they were also coming from the work of von Braun and his team. But they developed very much these rockets, and they And they had ready a launcher for the Sputnik, because the rocket that you can see in the picture is the launcher of the Sputnik 1, but it is the same as an R-7 ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. It was designed for H-bombs, and then it was used for a satellite. Also, the Americans did the same, because the first rockets of the Americans were the Redstone family. They were IRBMs, the intermediate range, and they were a little behind in those times. In fact, the Soviets arrived first, but they were derived from military rockets as well. And of course, you can use assets in orbit also for spying, for reconnaissance, that is spying, or as you will want to call it. The Americans had very little information on what was happening in Russia, what was happening with the Soviet military. And they used the spy planes like this one. I put the image because this is a beautiful plane, in my opinion. But it is the famous U-2 that was shot down by the Soviets in 1960. The Americans were overflying the Soviet territory with these kind of planes at very high level. But in the end, the Soviets with their rockets could shoot them down. And of course, in that time, it became more useful to have satellites for doing that job. So the Sputnik was a shock for the Americans, because the Sputnik meant that the USSR was able to deliver nuclear weapons to every location on Earth, and it was able to spy everywhere in the world. And of course, satellites can fly everywhere, and because it is illegal for airplanes to fly on the territory of another nation without permit. But for satellites, what can you say? For satellites, the satellites go everywhere, and no one ever dared say that it is satellites are not allowed to overfly. So the official reason, of course, that was written in the newspapers was that it was for advanced science, but it was, of course, for spying, and of course the rockets were also as weapons. And of course, everybody was thinking about weapons. In 1958, General Homer Bushey said that those who control the moon control the Earth, because the moon is a perfect retaliation base. If you have a nuclear weapons based on the moon, your enemy cannot attack you on Earth, because otherwise, of course, you can retaliate from the moon. So a lunar base with nuclear weapons can be very interesting from a military point of view. And so it was a good reason to be first on the moon. Of course, it was clear to both sides that in the Cold War that pursuing this goal was being pursued for real. And both recognized that they would not be able to prevent the other side from reaching the moon, albeit a second, or even only placing weapons in space. In fact, they reached very quickly an agreement about the Outer Space Treaty. Because if you also consider a weapon placed in orbit, if you launch an ICBM, if you launch a rocket from the ground, you have an ascent phase where the powerful engines are very visible. If you have your own satellites that are spying the enemy territory, you can see the rockets being launched. While if you have a nuclear weapon in orbit, it's very easy to deorbit it with a very, very little push, and then make it fall on the target in a very short time and with no early warning. So both sides, in the end, were eager to prevent the opponent from placing armaments, from placing nuclear weapons in orbit. And so they reached, in 1967, the conclusion that it was better to prohibit everybody to place weapons in space, to place nuclear weapons, because it's not totally prohibited to place weapons in space, only weapons of mass destruction. And in fact, they could place in orbit even non-nuclear and non-explosive devices. Kinetic bombing, for instance, is an idea of weapon, space weapon. It is just a metal bar, a tungsten bar, 6 meter. The Americans studied this in 2003. A 6 meter long bar of tungsten. It can be just shot down from the space, and by its own weight and the shape, aerodynamic space shape, it can reach very high speed and so very high kinetic energy. Equivalent, a bar like that has the energy of more than 10 tons of TNT. But an equivalent Desirati tower can be obtained with ground or air-launched missiles if you can. So it's not necessary. In the end, it will be very costly. No one ever tried to do something like that, just because a weapon like the HIMARS is much more effective in the end. We have described before how it works, and it's much simpler and much less expensive. So what happened with the space race? If we see it from the geopolitical point of view, the Outer Space Treaty stopped placing weapons in space. So these two big rockets, I put the images of the two competing rockets because in those times I was just a young boy in the 60s. I was there, but and I saw everything of the American side. I saw nothing of the Russian side, of course. Now we know everything about what Russians did, and this is the N1 rocket that unfortunately never worked. It exploded several times on the launch pad, and so they gave up, because since it was not about placing weapons, it was not by seizing places in those times, and so why be the second? It's better if you are the first. You have an image advantage. You have an image boost. But if you are second, this was nothing. So the Russians gave up, and also the Americans after reaching the moon. Of course, the Apollo program was very important from the science point of view, because the astronauts did really a big lot of science and the amount of information that they brought back is huge. But in the end, the last 3 flights of Apollo were cancelled, and the Mars program that von Braun proposed immediately was rejected. The Americans were too eager to make war in Vietnam and not going to Mars. During the last decades of the 20th century, the only motivation for going to outer space with human crews was scientific research. So there were experiments, very important, but limited to low Earth orbit, like the American Skylab and the Russian Mir. Both of them were very important for science, and both of them reached significant results. And then they, after the fall of the Soviet Union and so on, with what happened, some nations joined forces and they built the ISS. That is a laboratory, and very expensive one, by the way. China was left out, and then China is going on its own. We will see after. The exploration of the solar system by automatic probes went on, and no significant progress in true expansion into outer space was made. We all know we are in a very big delay. If we could have followed the suggestions by von Braun, we could have reached the Mars in 1980s or maybe 1990s. And you remember the famous movie 2001 Space Odyssey. It describes a travel to Jupiter in 2001, but it was possible. It was not. It's not just science fiction. It was based on possible projects, but they were not done because there was no interest from the nation. By the way, from the side of the nation, the political decision makers. So exploration went on with robotic probes, and some discoveries were made. And water was found on the moon and essentially everywhere. It's very interesting. This is very important because I remember a science fiction movie where they were desperately looking for water in somewhere in space. But now we know that water is everywhere. It's on the moon, it's on Mars. The comets are made of water. Most of the moons of the outer solar system planets are essentially made of water. So, for instance, water is everywhere. And we know asteroids are full of metals and everything. So the idea of exploiting extraterrestrial resources reappeared. Also in what is geopolitical analysis. In 2002, Everett Dolman wrote a book entitled Astropolitics. And he wrote this like this way because he was making a reference to a book by the German author Haushofer, who was one of the founders of Geopolitics. And so he wanted to make a reference to that. And this book is dealing about expansion into space. And many considerations are about the necessity of expanding for finding resources into space to allow the growth of the nations. Not so much different with what we say in Space Renaissance. He didn't mention Kraft-Erik and other people we always mention, but he makes a reference to Dandridge Cole mostly for his ideas. And he showed that the principle of geopolitics could start to be applied to outer space. A much more complex and articulated vision, not just putting weapons in space. Is about expanding in space to increase the resources of the nations and to make nations more powerful. And here we go back to 19th century, because in 19th century there was this gentleman who was Admiral Alfred T. Mahan of the US Navy. He wrote a very, very influential book, The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. This is an essential book where he studied the events not of the 19th century, but before the 17th and 18th century, how the British Empire was formed and what were the conflicts between the sea powers of the time. And essentially, he showed how the development of sea power is strictly linked to the developed economy and is essentially linked to all the economy, all the structure of the nation. During the two world wars, the USA took the place of the UK, of course. And in perfect accord with his theories, the Cold War ended with the main sea power, the USA, prevailing in the struggle with the continental opponent, the USSR. This is about everything, because about the development that makes military power, and also military power helps development. This is an essential part in Mahan's analysis. And he showed very, very well how dominating the sea means having the upper hand in international relations. Why are we talking about the sea? Because the space is like the sea. The sea is a wide space, 2/3 of the Earth, where people cannot settle but can travel. It is huge but has strategic positions that the sea power can control without extending its forces too widely. Because seafaring nations can develop strong economic structure through trade and the use of remotely available resources. And all these concepts apply to space as well as to the sea. Planets and asteroids are like continents and islands. Means immensely there are specific points from where it's possible to control human activities on planets in space, because, for instance, gravitation creates position of advantage and so on. Because, of course, how could Britain dominate the world? Britain is not so large as a nation, but it's very important to find the right places where you want to place your bases. If you look at the map of the world and find the strategic places of the sea, in every single strategic place there is a British base that then maybe became an American base. So distance is not important. There are other concepts. Position counts. In space, delta V counts. If you are out of a gravity well, you are halfway to everywhere. Lagrange points are essential because they are points where it's very advantageous to place things. Like, for instance, straits are in the sea. And bases for fueling and refurbishment count much more than territories. For instance, in 19th century, where it was very important to have places for refueling the ships. And it is the same for spaceships. because you need a place where you can find fuel, and you can have fuel storage. This is like the paradox of the sea. Mahan explained that Portugal is nearer to Britain than to Spain, because Portugal is connected to Britain much better. And it was strategic to the British to win the struggle against Spain. In space, it is Mars is nearer to the moon than to the Earth, for instance. There are many concepts that are the same. So a quick start of human expansion in space is needed for the good reasons that SRI is giving, among others, and they are explained in several documents. But on another side, historical, the motivations drive human enterprises have always been profit and power. Geopolitics and now Astropolitics analyze how nations behave in consideration of economic and political factors based on geography, that is the study of places and human-built physical and social structures. While agreeing with the SRI positions, Astropolitics indicates national and private also interested as the strongest motivation. Expansion in space can happen, it is perceived as necessary for private and national interest, that is political and economic competition. Settlement on the moon, for instance, was not considered in the 60s and the 70s because politicians and entrepreneurs did not believe it possible. Even if von Braun, Cole, Eric, O'Neill were laying the principle of expansion into space, but politicians were not hidden. But now, politicians and entrepreneurs are understanding that it is expansion into outer space is possible, and competition helps, because reluctant politicians and the constituents were convinced with the idea that, for instance, if America does not establish a permanent lunar base, China will. And the Chinese probably are already convinced, and they already believe that it's better to be the first on the moon, to make a base, not the first on the moon, just to arrive there and put a flag. If they put a flag to say, this is ours. And then it's becoming comprehensible that if you take possession of extraterrestrial resources, you can dominate the Earth. Because if your economic structure can be improved, if you can plug into the resources of space, you can make your nation stronger, and you can dominate the Earth. Now governments are starting to think this. And now the race to the moon is not a race to the moon just to be the first there and plant a flag and we are the first and bye-bye. There are places that give advantages, so now they want to take possession of the places. Lunar poles, for instance, and Lagrange points. Lunar points are essential because they are the places where you can find much water and you can have energy, always energy, because solar energy, because there are places in the lunar poles that are constantly lit by the sun. But the lunar poles are not so big. So it's very important to be first there. Current international treaties do not allow to take exclusive possession of anything in space, because space is considered a common possession of humanity. But as soon as a nation needs to be ready to do that, they can retreat from their treaty or declare it outdated and ineffectual. Because unfortunately, there is no one to enforce international treaties if nations don't want to apply them. Once a nation will feel that it can take possession of something in space, that nation can say, okay, the treaty is not anymore valid. We have taken this, and if you want it to come here and fight. Once you have started to consider true expansion into outer space, geopolitical considerations come in, and nations have to compete to a new level. When a weak Russia instead replaced the USSR and only scientific research was considered, cooperation was natural, and the ISS was created. All the nations who were already involved in space were involved, except China. In the new century, of course, this window of opportunity for peaceful collaboration is closing, because USA and Russia are clashing. Everybody agrees that the main contenders in any case are USA and China. And India and Turkey are also involved. India very much, but also Turkey. And unfortunately, the European Union is not a geopolitical entity. The single nation of Europe are. France, Germany, Britain, Italy, they have some space policy, especially France. But we are not here to analyze the position of each nation. Unfortunately, there is no European position, geopolitical position. Only about, we are talking about many nice things, but not about geopolitical and so astropolitical considerations. And we have no truly advanced launchers. We depend on the Americans. Because sorry to say that, but Ariane 6 is obsolete before the first launch. Because you can see what is the meaning, what is Falcon 9 compared with that. In this conflictual scenario, space is taking place, is taking its place. Besides nation, private entities are also entered the fray, of course. The private subjects are essentially all American. And this is a very strong point for the USA. Space interests in other countries depends on agencies and governments. Several politicians and general public may not understand, but Chinese rulers do. So they are trying to foster some private enterprises also in China. The first nation that has installed a communication device in Lagrange point is China. The Chiechao satellite in 2018 to allow the communication with the probe. They landed there in 2019 on the far side of the moon, the first ever to land on the far side of the moon. And their exploration is finalized to finding resources and preparing for future settlement. Long-term planning is typical of the Chinese, we all know. And it's more difficult for Western countries to plan for in long term, because we have elections every 4 or 5 years, and this is a drawback of democracy. The American concept is or should be, because we have the SLS, and we should discuss very much about that, letting private companies do the job with the government in support where needed. American space power can develop the same lines of British sea power of the past. In China, there is a pirate system as well, but state-owned entities will prevail, and the private companies are much more subject to government supervision. This compares well with the enhanced description of the competition between Britain and France in the 17th and 18th century for sea power, because in Britain there was a cooperation between private companies and the government, the state. And with much interaction, and for instance, we all know that the British Empire was created by the private company, the East India Company. It was a joint stock company. It was basically it created the British Empire in Asia. While France was much more like China, because the French governments always wanted to control everything in the economy in those times. Also, the institution of the two nations were different, because France was a kingdom, an absolute kingdom, while Britain was a constitutional kingdom. There was no constitution. There is still no constitution in Britain, but it's a parliamentary kingdom. But now private space is very important. Everybody knows that currently the largest number of launches is performed by a private entity for private purposes, SpaceX with Starlink. Private initiatives have got tremendous cost reduction. The total cost of development of Falcon, the total cost of development of Falcon 9 launch system was equivalent to a 3/5 of a single space shuttle launch, $300 million against $500 million. So, launching a single space shuttle flight costed much more than the total development of the Falcon 9. After the device of space shuttle, the USA recovered the ability to send crews to space with a new commercial model, where even missions contracted by agencies like NASA make use of launchers and vehicles fully developed, owned and managed by a private entity like SpaceX. SpaceX is now leveraging on its capability to launch multiple low-cost missions to develop a fully private telecommunications satellite constellation, Starlink, intended to give speedy internet connectivity to remote areas with bad or no ground connection. But what is happening now? Starlink has become an exchange service for war-torn Ukraine. Ukraine has lost ground services because of war, not because of the territory. And now Starlink is essential for that. Starlink has become a weapon in a certain sense. And by the way, it is because the Ukrainian army is receiving information from the American intelligence through Starlink. This is the confirmation of Mahan's theory about the sea. Sea trade allows economic prosperity. Sea power is, first of all, economic power, and political power derives from it. Space power is starting to follow the same path. Government needs to support private enterprise, but also to wield military power, because a private enterprise needs to be protected from a military point of view. Otherwise, a militarily powerful nation could disrupt your trade. So military power leverages on the commercial fleet and defends the commercial fleet, both sides. So the true space race is starting now. It's about resources and settlement, not just science. National interest comes as a fundamental factor. Competition among nations is in fact starting to fuel expansion. It's likely that it can be more effective than cooperation as a motivation for people and governments. It's already apparent how there are at least 3 competing nations in the space race, each one with the plans for space stations, moon settlements: USA, Russia, and China. As mentioned earlier, India is moving to join them and has long-term plans of its own. Russia is living off the achievements of the past. Their space technology is good, dependable, but it's outdated, and they are not improving very much. Due to the disastrous decision to start the war in Ukraine, of course, that it is destroying its international position and economy, its future in space is uncertain and may be ancillary to China. It's already happening. Russia is joining China because they are giving China technology, but China is developing its own, also copying American one. And basically, on that side, there is China mostly. India has good plans and has the political will. Its resources are smaller and it has not capability of launching crew for now. They are going to there too. The Indians are very good. If you look at, they have found a way to make cheap launchers, and they have a high success rate. Europe can only support the USA, since the economical industrial model of Europe is outdated. Europe is not following this path, and there are no consistent plans. For instance, no plans for reusable launchers in Europe. Therefore, the main competitors are USA and China. So I put just to see the symbols. On the left, you see the symbol of the Chinese space agency, and on the right you have the symbol of the United States Space Force, the military. Because America has 3 pillars: private enterprise, NASA, and the new Space Force. China is trying to develop, as we said before, a private space industry, but by the nature of the system, private industry in China is not as in the West. It will be kept under strict government control. As I mentioned before, it's something like the competition between Britain and France in the past centuries, in the 17th and 18th century, studied by Mahan. So, SRI sees expansion into outer space the only effective solution to the progressive exhaustion of the resources of the Earth, including its capacity to absorb pollution, preserve biodiversity, and so on, while keeping our civilization alive, prosper, and growing. I don't want to repeat everything because, of course, this has been treated in the SRI documents. This expansion is considered as peaceful and cooperative, based on an open economy and a free political system. Astropolitical analysis agrees on the basic concepts, but puts them in context of international politics, where independent nations and non-governmental large organizations as well, like companies like SpaceX or maybe also other kinds of international organizations that are not exactly nations, pursue their goals in competition with one another. The growth of human civilization translates in the growth of human nations, which according to geopolitics includes fictions, and above all, the quest for political prevalence or dominance. In an astropolitical view, the nation which can better harness the resources of outer space can politically prevail on other nations of the Earth. Currently, we have on Earth the prevalence of the USA, rooted in the global sea power. and it succeeded to the British dominance, along the lines described in Mahan's theory. It's both economic and military, as the two cannot be separated. As we have seen, they both sustain each other. Dolman and others believe that it is going to happen in space too. Economic prosperity will translate into political dominance, with space replacing the sea. Now the race is starting, and the nation that takes dominance in space will take dominance on Earth too. There are two main competitors, USA and China, and two minor ones, Russia and India. So in the end, we can put some questions. The astropolitical thesis is this, in the strongest version. Either governments and powerful organizations support expansion into space, aiming to space power, or no expansion into space will happen, because we saw what happened in the last century. The first question is, can expansion into space take place for the goodwill of illuminated leaders, or the pursuit of international power required? Because what is the motivation? It seems that the pursuit of international power is the strong one. The second is, can expansion into space happen without bringing all our rivalries in it? So, isn't the race now about who is first into the lunar poles in Lagrange points? Who is the first and takes possession of the most significant places in space? Because space is very large, but there are places that are very important for us for starting the expansion. Final note, on the 12th of August 2022, the American Vice President Kamala Harris declared that current space regulations are outdated and must be replaced. As I said before, all these treaties will be replaced as soon as some important nation, the USA or China, will say, okay, these treaties are outdated and it's time to make a new treaty, or no treaty at all, and this is much worse. And that's all. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and maybe some questions now.
Thank you so much for this interesting lecture, Alberto. Yeah, we have people in the chat from, I guess, from Poland, from New York, from Norway, as I told you, from the British Empire. Yeah, from Italy, Florida, and Queens, New York, genau. Okay, there was a comment from Ena. Ena, I sent you an invitation in Messenger to join us via Zoom, if you like, because you put so many comments. Maybe you will join us in the Zoom. And yeah, regarding the competition, Eirik Isam says Elon placed himself in a comprising position, financial and political. And I think the private sector plays a big role also in this space race.
Yes, of course, but you can see how it is connected to governments. For instance, now what's happening? Starlink is very important for the war in Ukraine. And now Elon Musk wants to be paid. And he's going to the American government to be paid. On the other side, he couldn't have reached these results without the help of American institutions, because he needs permissions. He also has very important contracts with NASA.
Sorry.
Yes, so you can see as the private sector and the governments support each other, because once you want to expand into space, effectively you need the private sector. But on the other side, governments have to allow this, and to finance this for reaching their own goals. And the main goal is grabbing the resources, and grabbing the resources by sending the private companies to do that. But then the government is needed on the one side and takes advantage on the other side. For instance, consider the history of the British Empire. The East India Company conquered India, not the government of Britain. But we also know that then the Queen Victoria was the Empress of India in the end. So you can see very well, you can America can send Elon Musk to do that, but then in the end it will be America.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Ina Larsen is saying economy is often mentioned here, and the money system is one of the biggest sources of lust for power, and a major obstacle to the peaceful development of the settlement and active life in space. There's no question, it's only a comment.
Only a comment.
And then Sorkin is saying, all of us participating in this event live in the US and Europe, I'm a strong supporter of US and European cooperation in space science, that NASA and ESA, that's what's NASA and ESA. In the military area, it's NATO. Yeah, I think we need really a contract to solve this problem, but I think many people don't care if, as you mentioned, if China is there on the moon first, they will put their equipment and explore the moon.
They don't want to explore the moon. They want to take possession of the moon. The Chinese position is easy to understand. They want to take possession of the lunar poles, because once you have possession of the poles of the moon, you have possession of the water and the most favorable positions on the moon. So the first who gets there is not anymore about being the first or making science. It's not about science anymore. Once you are considering expansion, you are considering economic factors, not anymore. It's not about science, it's about industry. And when you have industry, when you have economy, you also have power, because economy, in the end, money is not fundamental. Power is fundamental. Money is to get power.
Here's another question from Dan. The question is, can we balance national competition in space, both economic and military, with a need for some minimal cooperation? If it gets all, to all out war, we all lose. It's true.
It's true. It's true. But and that's why I put the questions in the end. So, is it possible? I don't want to give a final answer. This is an analysis I gave. Maybe I'm not here to play the role of the bad guy. I just want to say this is the analysis of what's happened on our Earth. Is the way nations expand into space. But by the way, also science fiction books show this. They show space wars. And space wars are already there, because you have anti-satellite weapons have already been tested. And the military is considering how to fight in space. That is very different from fighting on the ground. For instance, you cannot use very easily a gun in space, because if you are in orbit and you fire a gun, the bullet will get into orbit and will hit you in the back. This is something that is very difficult to understand for people who don't understand the physics of orbit. So in space, for instance, you must use energy weapons, not bullet weapons. And they are already thinking about this, because they want to seize places on the moon. They want to seize the Lagrange points. The Lagrange points are not so big. You cannot If you want to put your communication satellites there, then it's already true for the geostationary orbit. You know that it's very strictly regulated because there is not so much space in the geostationary orbit, and it is the same for Lagrange point. So if we, and as you can see in these last 40, 50 years, since there was no much interest in power, basically it was only science, so we are stuck into low Earth orbit. Now they are thinking about grabbing the resources for economic growth. For economic growth brings money, that brings power, that brings competition among nations. Unfortunately, there is no cooperation between USA and China. No cooperation at all.
Can I add something?
They are competing.
Yes, it was a really excellent, very profound presentation and very interesting from different points of view. So it is clear, maybe we have to make a realistic, cynical statement that the civilization expansion into space will not be civilian. Would be a mix of civilian and military. Because, as you well said, governments need private sector. This is evident, and the history demonstrates that, and the contemporary history also demonstrated. Therefore, there is a role for privates in the expansion. Now we have to try to separate our view from two different points of view. One is the philosophical view, and another is the political view. If we talk from the philosophical point of view on the long-term future, that is the future, the destiny of humanity and of civilization, then we have to say very, very pragmatically, whatever the reason, the point is to go. So if we will go civilian, if we will go by a civilian expansion, okay. If we will go by a military expansion, is okay too, because the point is to go. If we don't go, civilization is scrapped, and I think we have the demonstration on Earth now in the current situation, because we had pandemics, we had wars, we have crazy things happening, but with governments, not with single small groups or lonely people. No, with governments that go crazy directly on a rod that is not possible to be understood, like the invasion of Ukraine, like many other things that we are seeing. So we are sure that the solution is to open the system and start expansion. The point is, during this expansion, that it, as you said, it will be probably driven by the governments and by the power interests, by USA and China and Russia and India and the emerging powers and so on. Privates will give their help, but there will be room for them. I mean, when the private sector will have helped replacing the obsolete SLS with the new reusable system that will cost very less, and so it will be strategically very much more useful. No, when privates will have done this, there will be a room for them to make industrial commercial activities in the geolunar system, or just to help powers to build their military bases for the competition between powers? This is the real question. And here we pass to the political point of view. Of course, if seeing from the philosophical point of view, we have to say, let's go. Whatever the reason, we have to go. If we have to go in space after a crazy dictator, is better than not to go. This is a philosophical point of view. That is not a political point of view. If we switch to the political view, we have to say, yes, we have to go to space, but privates should have a role, not only a role, but also a future, also a commercial development, also a possibility for all the people of Earth that want to migrate to be able to do it safely in the best. That's why we insist on the points of protection of life in space. So protection from cosmic radiations, simulated gravity, and all this kind of thing, the green environments and so on, because we want that the expansion will be a civilian expansion, fully inclusive. This is the political point of view. This is our political focus that we have to make our best to spread and to convince the larger number of people as possible. And we have also to start discussing about what outreach we are doing. In the IAF, which kind of outreach is IAF doing? We are members now of IAF. So IAF is making an outreach that basically says, space is useful for Earth. So when they say space for all, they mean space resources should be useful for all on the Earth's surface. When we say space for all, we mean quite another thing. We mean space must be for all. Everybody should have the possibility to go. This is our political focus, our real engagement in this discussion. And this is very important, because if we say that, yes, it is true, space was very important for life on Earth. Since 60 years to nowadays, space made a lot of things for Earth. The GPS and new materials, and a lot is useless now to make the list, but there is a very huge list of things that the space technology made for Earth. Life.
Can I enter here because there are some questions for you, Adriano, also?
Sorry,
Eric is asking, the spiritual view is different from philosophical?
Sorry. Let me just complete my small period. But now we have to demonstrate what space resources can do for space, for an expanded civilization into space, for building infrastructures and vehicles, and produce fuel in space, and to start populating space, to start expanding. This is the right point to be demonstrated in our outreach. Space technologies will continue to help life on Earth, but it should start to favor it, to help expansion of life in the outer space. This is a very important point, that it is our task, I think, of Space Renaissance, because I see that there is a lot of confusion on this point. So, Sabine, please go.
Yeah. Here's a question. The spiritual view is different from philosophical, is one question, and the other is from Dan. He is not sure if he agrees with that philosophical position, Adriano.
Yeah.
Space exploration and development is vital, but I think the preservation of the Earth is even more important.
Well, let me say it's equally important. It's not more important, because, of course, if we don't conserve Earth, we are ended. However, our civilization dies, because living on another celestial body or in space is not mature at all. So if we destroy Earth, we are, however, scrapped. So we can say it is important, but it is also important to go outside and to start developing outside. Otherwise, we are scrapped, because this is what we have to understand. 8 billion people cannot continue to develop in the Earth boundaries, in our planet boundaries, because we are, maybe we will not finish, finish the resources, the material resources, but for sure we are finishing the environmental resources, and that cannot be enlarged very much. Science can make maybe some miracles to multiply fishes and bread and fishes, but not to multiply the air, the water, and the natural environment and so on. For this reason, we have to go, because if we don't go, we will eat everything. There is no possibility to stop, or to, if we start to degrade in order to not eat everything on Earth, that will be worse than to keep on going ahead. It will be worse, because our civilization will decay and implode and finish in any case. So we have to go. They are equally important to go outside and to keep as much as possible.
He is agreeing with you. He's agreeing with you, and Steve is adding, space technology development is also important to help protect Earth from possible large asteroid impacts.
Exactly. Yes, this is another very important.
Alberto wanted to say something because he's always speaking. So.
Yes, I'm sorry. I left it.
No, what Adriano said is very important, and a couple of things. I fully agree that for whatever reason we go to space, we must go. So if competition among nations is allowing us to go to space, then that's good. If China and USA are racing to be the first, by racing, they will reach the outer space. Otherwise, it will be much more difficult for everybody. On the other side, it's fully true that expansion does not mean military and civilian are supporting each other. Because if you look at what Mahan says about the sea power and what Everett Dolman says about astropolitics, basically, because of course Everett Dolman is inspired by Mahan. Essentially, what you see is that there is the two kinds of development are intertwined, because the power of nations is based on their economy. So if economy does not expand, the military cannot. And this was the huge problem that caused the fall of the Soviet Union, for instance. The Soviet Union had a strong military and a weak economy. So it fell. It was not defeated in war. It was defeated by its economic and social flaws. So in the end, if the economy and in society doesn't support it, military is useless. But the reverse is also true. We also need the military push for and military defend the civilian development from competition with other nations. So and in the end, what we need is a motivation for the nations. And if this motivation is grabbing power, then let it be. It's okay. As soon as we are able to expand into space. I fully agree with this, because I also want that we expand not for these reasons, but if these motivations are good for making us expand into space, then it's good. On the other side, it's fully true that if there is no room for civilian development, there is no room also for power of nations, because it comes from civilian development. A nation without civilian development cannot be strong. We can see it. Now Russia is very weak. And Russia is doing the same mistake of the Soviet Union. It has put everything on the military. and on the exploiting natural resources recklessly. And then where are they going? They are destroying themselves.
Yes.
But China is not like this. China understands this. China doesn't want to make war. Maybe they are threatening war sometimes and so on, but China is competing on the economic ground. And this is good for everybody. If this brings us to space, it's good. In the end, is what we want is that we expand into space. And for the reasons that Ariano said, it's in the eyes of everybody. If you read the book of Everett Dolman, it says the same things. That we have to expand into space, and but he also analyzes competition among nations and about international laws and everything. And from the point of a geopolitical and now astropolitical point of view, that means studying how the nations interact with each other. And this is his analysis says we must go to space. Nations want to go to space to be more powerful, but this brings economy with expansion, because without economy, you cannot support expansion. And in the end, we'll see what happens. We hope that we are not going to fight too much and maybe expand more peacefully than with war. It's luckily China is not so keen to make war like Russia was. Russia is. So we may hope that this competition is rough, is hard, but may not become an open war between USA and China. I hope that maybe China can find some leader more peaceful than Xi Jinping, but we will see. So
I also had a question for you, Alberto. You mentioned in your presentation several times the Outer Space Treaty. Yes. That, of course, this document is old because it was made 50 years ago, and many rules are outdated because it didn't foresee the commercial space activities. The most important point is this one. However, there are some rules that are still very important. The prohibition to put weapons in space and so on. And I can see that there are many groups and organizations in the space community that are studying the Outer Space Treaty and studying how it could be improved and how it can be made respected for the important points that it contains. So my question to you is this one. In your opinion, so far, it was respected? So did they put big weapons in space already, and they tested something, they destroyed some satellites, they made some bad things, let's say, in space, and maybe they didn't infringe the space treaty because the actions and the weapons were not that big and lethal to infringe the rule. But I'm not very concerned about the infringements on the commercial side, because on the commercial side, for sure, it will be infringed. When somebody will start mining asteroids, somebody will start mining the moon, etc., that will be an infringement. And the jurisdiction we have to work and to make an advance of the law, of the space law, for sure. But I'm concerned about the military side because nobody really knows what the military are doing in space and what already is orbiting over our heads. So my question is that I know is a difficult question. Do you think the space treaty will resist the winds of the military competition or not? So we can also see this question in another from another point of view. Will the powers have some interest in conserving the validity of the Outer Space Treaty? Maybe this is the right question to be we should try to answer.
Yes, first of all, the first point is that international treaties, unfortunately, are only valid as long as nations respect them, because there is no international authority that can enforce an international treaty. Only single nations can.
Yeah.
And so basically, international treaties are respected if the main nations respect them. I think that till now, nations respected the Outer Space Treaty about weapons because they have placed no mass destruction weapons in space. Mm-hmm. Because there is no advantage. This is the main reason. You have no big advantage in putting nuclear weapons in space now, for now. And maybe also for the future, because we are seeing how useless nuclear weapons are. Because Russians have a lot of nuclear weapons, but what can they do? They can just start the destruction of the world now, but they cannot use them to win the war in Ukraine. So yeah, they can only decide, no, now we have lost, we want to destroy the world because we have lost the war. But they cannot win the war with the nuclear weapons. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happened from this point of view, we can say it's not so likely that nations will put nuclear weapons in space violating the treaties. It's true that the treaties are obsolete, of course, but and it will be very complicated to reach a new agreement because the agreement of the 60s was reached because the only thing they were caring about was weapons. They were not so much caring about economic development because in the 60s they didn't think that it was possible.
Yeah,
politicians, maybe von Braun thinks thought so, but the politicians did not.
Yeah,
they were only interested. John Kennedy wanted to be the first in the moon, just for the prestige of the nation. Not he was not interested in the economic side, and he was wrong maybe. So, but in any case, it was a good thing because going to the moon also brought us many other advantages. But in any case, they were not believing this, so they were not interested in the economic side. Now the economic side is becoming important, and now we strongly need that the nations agree about a new international treaty about outer space. Because otherwise, what will happen is the Wild West that on the moon. That the first coming here will put the flag and say, "This is mine."
Yeah,
and it's not about placing weapons.
Will happen, I think.
Yeah,
because audience will go after that.
But not to place weapons there, to use the resources. It's much different.
Sure,
it's much different.
No, exactly. That's what I said. I'm not much concerned about the commercial part.
So I am not much concerned too, but I'm not much concerned about that. But I'm concerned that we may have some conflict on the moon, maybe. Yeah. I don't want to see American and Chinese astronauts shooting each other. That's what.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would not be.
There was a Netflix series about that.
Yeah. Yes, because anyone can imagine.
Stephen is also saying, however, the Outer Space Treaty might be rewritten. It depends on whether everyone is willing to sign up to it and abide by it. But probably not, I'm afraid. Oh, we have Bernard here. Bernard is our president. Hello, welcome, Bernard.
Okay, yes, sorry. I'm just
Have you followed? Did you follow the lecture and the discussion?
Just a bit, some of it passively, but I was in transfer now from Geneva, so I will have to watch it back. Yeah.
We are close to finish actually, but say what you wanted to say. Welcome first.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Actually, so you see, I am on travel, and so I come from a series of lectures that I gave at Geopolitics Lausanne, and we had actually also very interesting set of lectures about the Outer Space Treaty, and so clearly that's also important to consider what we have in the law that is built and how we prepare the future, take into account the technology, our goals, our human values. Space Renaissance is among them, but also what all the benefits society and economical aspect. So yes, I'm looking forward to see how we establish this new strategic axis, a roadmap for our activities.
Thank you. Eirik is saying, cancer or creators, even deeper, what would be the difference? Not to colonize, but to become indigenous to space, also to destroy, also to disconnect or destroy the biome which birthed consciousness. For the sake of consciousness? Question. You don't understand the question? Can you read it in the chat? Adriano?
Was it for me, the question?
No, it was actually for all, but...
For all.
Would the technical approach to human behavior, such as social cyber engineering, this one?
Yeah.
Such a technique be more acceptable, wrong, or superior? Do we have a right to, or ego and psyche?
No. Cancer or creators, this one. Von Eirik Isam. But the second takes the last question, yeah. He has many questions, yeah.
Or any other forms of the rights of consciousness for biological and any other forms of consciousness.
Maybe you can put it in the chat and Alberto can read it.
Yes, because I am not.
Can you copy paste it?
Thank you.
And my problem is I'm here with my iPad and I cannot take it from the iPad and into the laptop Zoom.
Because I didn't want to open YouTube because my interact widely.
Put both questions in the chat. Also, what technical approach to human behavior, such as socio-cyber engineering, would such a technique be morally acceptable, wrong, or superior? Do we have a right to, or ego and psyche?
Well, I think this is would open a quite different discussion. That is not the point of today. So maybe we will invite some studios, a researcher of bioethics, and we can develop this topic. But I wouldn't suggest to do it now. That is, we are going to to close our today webinar. What do you think?
As I said during the presentation, today I was talking astropolitics and geopolitics. That means no moral considerations about this. Then we ended with the expansion into space. So sometimes we entered it also into morals. But essentially, we were not talking philosophy, moral philosophy today. We were talking about an analysis of political issues.
Exactly.
An objective analysis of political issues. So it's not about we have the right to do this or we don't have the right. Frankly speaking, the nations are not considering what is right and what is wrong. They want a nation wants to be powerful and prosperous too. But morality is something different that must be discussed on another table. This is about how nations behave in history, how they did in history, and now what are they doing now? And if we analyze what's happening and what is likely to happen in the next future, this is the purpose of geopolitics. It's always on the fine line of not entering into morality, because if we enter into morality, then we talk about philosophy, about religion, about anything like that. but who has the right to do what. But in the end, the man with the bigger gun will win in the material world. Then if we go into the non-material world, and then there are many other things to be discussed. But the man with the big stick, it was Theodore Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, that said, always speak softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah. Okay, it's a nice ending word or closing word. Thank you, Alberto, for this interesting lecture, and I hope you can read afterwards the chat, because there was a lively discussion, and it would have been nice to have it in direct way. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. And Adriano, for your remarks, and Bernard for coming. I appreciate it, because I know you are traveling and you look so tired. I'm so sorry that you are on the way. You have to unmute. You have to unmute.
So I am at Geneva airport, but clearly I think these political issues are even more present now. They are resurgent. So there are many aspects of politicals that now we have to see how space can bring solutions, can bring tools to make peace, also to develop progress. So, and also how we can to listen with the various political interests and find a kind of a solution that can satisfy a large number. But clearly also what is important is to keep some of our universal values and try to spread them and have people really enacting them. So yes, this is just the start. So we have to continue this activities and this space renaissance with our partners. It's a good forum to start the discussion and look also an action movement for that. So thanks very much for this evening.
Thank you. And I also would like to mention that we are a non-profit organization. You can support us. Adriano, will you put in the chat our data, our website, and where you can join us? And I would like to mention our next webinar. Stephen Wolf will talk about creating a global policy framework that will enable the creations of communities beyond Earth. So I hope to see you all again next. It's next week, yes, because we had to postpone it because of the IAC meeting in Paris. And so next week, we will have again a webinar. So I would be happy if you join us and if you become member of SRI. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Alberto.
Thank you. And also, don't forget next week. Okay, here, just to tell you, I'm taking the train to go to the moon and Mars. That's what I have in my background. But next week, on Tuesday, 25th of October, we have a cosmic event. We have a partial solar eclipse that will be visible from all parts of Europe. So we are organizing an event where we try to share what we see. And this partial eclipse is not at the same time in each city. So let's try to organize something. And with Your Moon Mars and Space Renaissance, we are going to organize a kind of popular event where we will share our experience, our images, and our cosmic connection between Earth, humanity, the moon, and the sun. So think Tuesday, 25th of October, a partial solar eclipse over Europe.
Okay, so you see, stay tuned. We have a lot of events. So thank you so much. And I wish you all a nice evening. And yeah, goodbye.
Okay, take care.
Thank you very much.
Astra.
For listening. Thank you.
Yes, ad astra.
Ad astra.